metals as a sector has been in focus, and particularly steel has been in focus. There was a steel conference that took place last week. We are now joined by Sheshagiri, Joint Managing Director and Group CFO at JSW Steel. Sir, if you could just tell us about the conference, what was the feedback that you get? Will a lot of investments pick up after this conference?
Yeah, the focus of Make in Steel conference is emanating from the Make in India, which the Honorable Prime Minister has announced. In the Make in Steel, the main focus is how to stimulate the domestic demand of steel in various sectors. Either you take infrastructure or real estate or fabrication and engineering, or in the case of consumer durables, auto sector. These are the sectors where what is required to be done by way of a policy intervention by the government, and also from the user industry and also from the manufacturer. What are the steps that are required to be taken to stimulate the demand, steel demand in India, steel intensity of the demand in India? That is the focus of today's conference.
Can you talk about the steel prices? They have stabilized in the last 6 months. Do you think there is room for further upside?
Yeah, there is some volatility we have seen in the last 1.5 weeks. The prices were going up, and then when the coking coal prices corrected to a certain extent, we have seen a price correction in the steel prices also in line with the drop in the coking coal prices. But after the Chinese holiday, we have seen the iron ore prices picking up substantially, which used to be around $70–75 per ton. We are seeing over $90 per ton. So when the iron ore prices picked up again, we have seen an increase in the steel prices to the extent of $10–15 per ton. So that is what is happening. So it is more or less range bound. That is what we are seeing in the international steel prices.
Say if the US president actually goes ahead and does a lot of fiscal spending led by infrastructure and spending over there, do you think metals as a sector would continue to see very high demand?
Generally, we are seeing globally metal sector is doing better, because the investments, steel intensive investments, either in the oil and gas sector or in the infrastructure sector or in the mining sector, are picking up globally in line with the higher oil prices, higher commodity prices. So we expect the investments in these sectors would go up, which augurs well for the steel sector. So we expect steel demand to pick up, not only in US, in the global economy.
A lot of countries are getting protectionist, and a lot of adverse trade policies are coming in. Do you believe that's the biggest risk to the metal sector?
No, today what is happening is globally there is a oversupply relative to the demand so far. In that scenario, the steel exporting countries, they started dumping steel, which we call it as the unfair trade. So there are several governments have taken steps in that regard to stop this unfair trade, including India. So therefore, instead of calling it as a protection measures, maybe it is a level playing field, or to stopping an unfair trade, which are in line with the WTO guidelines. So that is the context in which we have to see this, particularly steel sector.
Right. Let's talk about India and how essentially demand has been post demonetization. Has January been much better than November, December?
Things are looking slowly, gradually coming back to normalcy after the remonetization efforts by the Reserve Bank of India. But what we need to see overall demand for steel in India. It was expected in the beginning of this financial year it would be 5% incremental demand will come, as against which the 9 months the steel demand was in the range of 3.5%. Even in this financial year, we don't expect a big pickup in this demand. It could be in this same range of 3.5%. We can say whether it is demonetization impact, or it is global impact, or it is investment cycle still sluggish. There could be several reasons for this slow growth in the overall steel demand.
Steel prices in India have gone up, but are they enough to go ahead and offset the cost rise impact?
Indian steel prices have gone up in line with the international steel prices, but if somebody calculates the landed cost of imports vis-a-vis the domestic steel prices, still domestic prices are at a discount to the landed cost of imports. Then whether we could pass it on the entire cost of increase in the raw material prices I don't think so. We could pass it on. Because coking coal prices, in fact, from around $75, it went up as high as $300. Even though it got corrected to the extent of $155 to $160 right now, the increase which has happened where the steel companies' cost of production went up in January and February months, they are not being fully passed on to the consumer, to the user industry. But now the coking coal prices got corrected, but the iron ore price is going up. So therefore, every time one challenge or the other for the steel sector, either dumping of imports or higher raw material cost or sluggish demand or lack of working capital, there are so many issues of this nature in the steel sector.
Right. In terms of private capex into metal space, do you expect that to increase?
I think this is a very interesting question because in India today we have 125 million ton of steel capacity. Out of that, the production, crude steel production is only at a level of 96 million ton. Demand is 85 million ton. That are the numbers broadly as far as the steel sector is concerned. So there is enough capacity in India even though demand goes up in the next 1 or 2 years time. We have to look at beyond 2 years. Any greenfield or a brownfield expansion, if it has to happen in India, we have to factor at least 3 to 5 years time. If steel demand picks up, existing capacities are absorbed in the next 2 years time. If we don't take steps in the next year and the following year to create incremental capacities, then there will not be any steel capacity in India to meet the increasing domestic demand. Therefore, there is a need definitely for the capex to be incurred in the steel sector, and also other metals could be the same situation. That is why I think there is a need for the private sector and also public sector to look at the next 2 to 3 year scenario and accordingly factor their capex plans.
Right. Do you think that India can become an export hub for steel going ahead, and that's where excess capacity would be utilized?
Indian steel industry that way is globally competitive. So it can export products, it can export quality products, it also export high-end value-added products. Taking that into account, we have the potential to export. But when the domestic demand is robust enough, there may not be a need to export. But today domestic demand is sluggish, as I mentioned to you, 3.5% growth. We have surplus capacity in India. So taking that into account, there is a need for us to put some quantities in the export market. But our exports are not substantial. It is only 5 to 6 million ton per annum.
Mr. Rao, thank you so much for taking out time for us. Always good to get a perspective from you. That was a voice coming in from one of the top steel companies saying that prices have gone up, but there are room for steel prices to go up further. Taking a break, coming back in 2 minutes.